"You're no hero. You're part of the problem. You don't belong here." The words cracked through the city council chamber like a gunshot. Loud, unflinching, shocking. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The stale air of bureaucracy clung to the walls, thick with years of petitions, complaints, and quiet civic battles. But nothing had ever felt like this. Emily Reed stood rigid, her voice rising not with fear, but with fervor. Young, confident, unwavering, her finger aimed like a weapon toward the man across the table. Bruce Delaney didn't flinch. He stood in his worn green jacket, cap pressed neatly to his brow. His medals, 4 in total, were pinned just above his heart, polished to a quiet gleam that spoke of time and memory. They caught the overhead light like echoes of a story no one had asked to hear. Then came the act no one could unsee. She spat. The wet strike hit his chest, catching just below the silver star. Time stopped. Someone gasped. A file folder hit the floor. The clerk at the corner desk froze mid-typing. The sound of a distant phone ringing somewhere in the building faded into an unreal hush. Bruce looked down slowly. His hand trembled, not from fear, not from rage, but from something deeper, older. His fingertips brushed the edge of the metal. The ribbon was damp now. His lips tightened, but he said nothing. Not yet. Across the room, a figure in the doorway halted. Suit jacket, salt and pepper hair, hands clenched into fists. He had just arrived, and had walked in at the exact second his daughter's spit struck the medal of the man who had once saved his father's life. He did not speak. Not yet. But everything in the air shifted. Something was coming. The morning light crept gently through the thin curtains of Bruce Delaney's apartment, casting long golden lines across the floorboards worn soft by time. He had risen before the sun, as he always did, not because of any obligation, but because his body had long learned that rest was a privilege, not a guarantee. The old aches and the clock inside him, once drilled into his bones by réveillé and ration lines, knew no alarms, only rhythm, only purpose. The apartment was modest, nestled on the edge of an aging neighborhood where fences sagged with memory and screen doors creaked like old hymns. Inside, everything had its place. The kettle was already whistling by the time he folded the blanket on the sofa, smoothing out each corner with the same precision he'd used on army cots half a century ago. The smell of strong coffee soon mingled with the crisp scent of dawn coming in through the cracked window. Somewhere outside, a mourning dove called low and steady, as if marking the hour. On the porch, Bruce stood straight, despite the stiffness that lived in his joints. He folded the flag that had flown through the night, a ritual, never forgotten. Each motion was deliberate. Fold, tuck, fold again. His hands, though knotted by arthritis, were precise. The stars disappeared beneath the stripes, one by one, until the whole thing rested tightly in his palms, a triangle of memory wrapped in respect. In the hallway, the wall of photographs stared back at him. Some frames were crooked. Some pictures had faded to near sepia. There was Helen, smiling in her Sunday dress, her arm curled around his young shoulders the day he came home. Next to her, a photograph of 2 boys in uniform, standing on a snowy hill, laughing in a moment stolen from a war. One of them was Bruce. The other was Thomas "Red" Reed, his best friend, his foxhole brother, and the man whose life he had once carried back through fire and ice. There were no words on the frame, only a date, and a small bronze star pressed into the corner of the wood. Bruce lingered there for a moment, fingers grazing the edge of the glass. He didn't speak to the photos. He never had. But sometimes the silence between him and them felt full, like a conversation remembered by the bones rather than the tongue. He dressed slowly, carefully. A fresh shirt, pressed slacks, the jacket with the patches he had sewn on by hand. The cap came last. The words, "United States Army Veteran," embroidered across the front, were faded now, the yellow thread pale with years, but they still held weight. He adjusted it in the mirror. It sat just above his brow, shadowing the lines of a face shaped by time and long-held principles. He checked the medals pinned to his chest, careful to keep them straight, undisturbed. Not for show, but for memory, for the ones who didn't make it home. By the time he stepped outside, the sky had shifted from golden to silver blue. A few neighbors moved along the sidewalk, heads down, earbuds in, lost in their own momentum. Bruce nodded to a young man unlocking his car door. The man didn't look up, just got in and drove off. No malice, just disconnection. Bruce didn't take it personally. The world had gotten faster than him. It didn't mean he wasn't still walking in it. He passed by the corner market and paused for a moment, considering stepping inside. Then he thought better of it. Last week, the new clerk hadn't recognized him and had barked at him to move it along when he'd taken a second too long to pull out his exact change. The look on the young man's face, impatience shaded with indifference, had stung more than it should have, so Bruce kept walking. At the pharmacy, he waited quietly at the counter. The technician, a girl no older than 22, barely glanced at him before tapping her keyboard. "You can't stand there," she said flatly, gesturing to a red line on the floor with her pen. "You need to step back." Policy. Bruce looked down, saw that his toe had drifted 3 inches across the vinyl line. He took a small step back, nodded once, and said nothing. Outside, a group of teenagers loitered near the corner store, leaning against their bikes. One of them noticed Bruce, nudged another. They laughed, softly at first. One pulled out a phone and began to film, mimicking the way Bruce adjusted his medals with a mocking salute. The laughter didn't follow him as he passed, but the echo of it stayed in his ears longer than he liked to admit. He turned down a side street and followed the narrow path that led to the cemetery. The iron gate creaked open at his touch, the hinges protesting like old bones. He moved with quiet purpose to a particular headstone, one with a flag already planted, and the name etched in careful block letters. William Delaney, brother, son, soldier. Bruce stood there a long while. He pulled a small slip of folded paper from his pocket and tucked it into the edge of the headstone where the wind couldn't reach. It said nothing more than 3 words. "Still standing, Bill." No one else was there to see him. No camera, no audience. Just memory, silence, and the weight of something he didn't name. By late morning, he returned to the community center where, every Thursday, he helped unload crates of canned goods and bagged vegetables for the food pantry. The staff greeted him with quiet familiarity. No fuss, no thanks, just mutual purpose. Bruce moved carefully, but with focus, sorting items into labeled bins, organizing what would later be given out to families in need. It wasn't charity. It was community. He liked that, liked being useful. He didn't speak much during the shift except to offer a few gruff words of advice to a teenage volunteer struggling to stack rice bags. Stack 'em like you're building a foxhole, flat and tight, or they'll all come down on your feet. The boy didn't understand the reference, but he followed the advice. Bruce nodded, satisfied. By early afternoon, Bruce was back home, preparing for the evening's town council meeting. He laid out the folded note he planned to read aloud. A short, respectful request to reconsider the zoning decision that would remove the Veterans Memorial to make way for a parking garage. His handwriting was neat, deliberate. He read it aloud once, not to rehearse, but to be sure his voice wouldn't fail when the time came. As he slipped the note into his inside jacket pocket, he glanced once more at the mirror. He did not see an old man. He saw a soldier who had never stopped standing. Outside, the sun was already lowering behind the trees. The meeting would begin soon. He picked up his cane, not because he needed it, but because it steadied him. And with a quiet breath, he stepped out the door, the weight of memory in his pocket, and the echo of forgotten heroes pressed against his heart. The council building was just 2 blocks away, but for Bruce Delaney, the walk felt longer this evening. The sidewalks had cracks he knew by memory, places where tree roots had lifted the cement like time pushing back against order. He stepped over each one with quiet care. The cane in his hand tapped a soft rhythm, not of weakness, but of deliberate pace. He had learned over the years that walking slowly often meant seeing more. The city center loomed ahead, its brick face washed in the last gold light of day. Flags fluttered above its doorway, state, city, and national, though one had come loose from its tie and flapped awkwardly in the breeze. Bruce noticed. He always noticed the little things that others walked past. Inside, the lobby smelled of laminate and floor wax, the kind that clung to the air long after the custodian had locked away his mop. The floor tiles echoed with every step, sterile and precise. A receptionist greeted him with a distracted nod, her fingers typing rapidly, earbuds tucked into her ears. Bruce nodded back, even though she didn't look up again. The meeting room was already filling. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, white and too bright. Plastic chairs scraped against linoleum as people found their places. There was the sound of a water bottle dropping, then being picked up in a hush. Conversations were held in low tones, neighbors talking about potholes, taxes, trash collection, and the proposal that had stirred the most emotion in recent weeks, the repurposing of Veterans Square into municipal parking. Bruce took a seat near the front, not because he wanted to be seen, but because he wanted to speak. Not loudly, just clearly. His cap sat folded in his lap, his coat buttoned, medals gleaming under the harsh ceiling lights. His note was tucked inside, the words handwritten carefully, folded into thirds like a letter home from war. At the far end of the room, the council members shuffled papers and tapped pens against notepads. Their expressions were flat, already tired. Only one or two glanced at Bruce as he entered. Most looked past him, and then she arrived. Emily Reed swept into the chamber like wind through dry grass, sharp, fast, and full of purpose. She wore her protest colors proudly, her coat covered in pins with slogans about dismantling old systems and making space for new truth. Her satchel clinked faintly from the weight of buttons and flyers inside. She walked with the assurance of someone whose voice had been praised, echoed, and affirmed in many rooms before this one. People shifted when she entered. A few nodded, a few frowned. She moved straight to the speaker's line, just 3 places ahead of Bruce, and stood with her chin lifted, arms crossed tight. There was no sign she saw him. Not yet. The meeting began with a gavel strike. Names were called, motions read aloud, voices dry with protocol. One by one, speakers stood, some with concerns about traffic, others about property values. Then, Emily was called. She stepped forward quickly, pulling a folded sheet from her bag. Her voice rang out clearly, young, confident, and charged with conviction. "This is not about disrespecting the past," she began. "It's about confronting what that past truly means." She spoke about representation, about healing spaces, about systems of harm encoded in stone and tradition. Her words were smooth, her rhythm practiced, and for a while, there was a kind of silence, the audience listening, perhaps unsure, perhaps compelled. Then her voice shifted. "We have glorified violence under the guise of honor. These statues, these squares, they don't speak for everyone. They never have." Bruce felt the room shift. A subtle unease settled into the air, and then she turned. For the first time, she looked directly at him. "Why is it," she said, her voice rising now, "that when men like him stand, everyone goes silent? Why do we pretend their presence isn't a reminder of war, of harm, of broken families left behind by all their so-called service?" Heads turned. All eyes were on Bruce now, but he didn't rise. He didn't speak. He simply looked back at her, steady and still. He had faced worse, far worse. A murmur spread through the room, uncomfortable, unsure. A man at the back shifted in his seat. A woman touched her husband's wrist, whispering something neither angry nor approving. Then Emily stepped forward. "You don't deserve that pedestal," she said, voice sharper now. "You're no hero. You're just another part of the past, trying to stall the future." Bruce's jaw tightened, but he remained seated. He slid his cap onto his knee slowly, then reached into his coat pocket. With careful fingers, he unfolded the note he had written earlier. the words he had practiced just that morning. He lifted it as if preparing to stand, but before he could rise, Emily reached out and snatched the paper from his hand. Gasps scattered through the room like dropped glass. She tore the paper once, twice, and dropped it to the floor. "You don't get to speak for us anymore," she said coldly. Bruce looked down at the torn pages, one corner of his name still visible. He leaned forward, picked up the pieces gently. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet weight, a pain older than her voice, deeper than her certainty. The receptionist near the entrance finally stood. "Let him speak," she called out, her voice small but firm. Emily whipped around. "Sit down!" The woman flinched but didn't sit. Then Emily turned back to Bruce, and that's when it happened. She stepped close. "You think these medals mean something," she whispered. And with that, she spat. A single, deliberate act. The spittle hit the medal second from the left, the one he had earned in snow and fire beside Thomas Red Reed. Bruce closed his eyes. He did not move, did not shout. Instead, he lifted one trembling hand to his chest. His fingers touched the medal gently, wiping away the wetness as if it were rain, not hatred. His breath caught for a moment, but he steadied it. The silence in the room had turned full and tight. Then, behind them, the sound of a door opening. A voice spoke, calm, low, but edged with something sharp. "Emily!" She turned, her face paled. Bruce slowly looked over his shoulder. Standing in the doorway was a man in a dark coat, the silver at his temples catching the light, his chest rising and falling with a quiet fury barely held in check. It was her father, and something inside the room shifted, not loudly, but deeply, as if the foundation beneath everyone's feet had just begun to tremble. The cold in Korea was not like the cold back home. It was sharper, cruel in its precision, cutting through even the thickest layers until it reached the bone. 19-year-old Bruce Delaney had learned that early, during the long nights when the wind slid down the mountains like a knife, and silence wasn't peace, but the prelude to something worse. It was late January of 1952, and Bruce was crouched behind a tangle of broken stone and earth, a ridge that had once been something, a road maybe, or a footpath, before the shelling had chewed it into unrecognizable ruin. The sky above was heavy with cloud, moonlight filtering through in strands, casting the snow in a cold silver glow. The only sound was the faint rattle of ice against metal, the way frost clung to the barrels of their rifles like a second skin. Next to him sat Thomas Red Reed, older by 3 years, broader in the shoulders, always grinning when he shouldn't be. They had met during basic, two kids from different corners of the country who had found themselves bound not by similarity, but by necessity. Red was the kind of man who could make a foxhole feel like a front porch, even with mortars in the distance, and nothing but a letter from home to keep your heart beating steady. Bruce glanced over at him. Red was digging into his rations with a fork that had lost one of its prongs, the same way he always did. Like every bite might be his last, and he was determined to enjoy it anyway. "You ever had real corn pudding?" Red asked suddenly, chewing around the question. Bruce shook his head. "My mama used to make it every Sunday," Red continued. "Whole house would smell like cinnamon and nutmeg for hours. I swear I can still smell it sometimes, right before the shelling starts. Like a memory trying to pull me home." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, creased a dozen times, edges soft from handling. He handed it to Bruce with a careful motion. "That's him," Red said, smiling. The photo showed a toddler, all dimples and overalls, seated on a hay bale, holding a toy truck bigger than his head. "My boy. Name's Robert. Got that same crooked smile as my old man. He turns 2 next month." Bruce looked down at the picture, the face of the child staring back at him from another world, one untouched by snow or steel or the fear that something might fall from the sky at any moment. "I'll bet he's proud of you," Bruce said softly, handing it back. Red laughed, then sighed. "If he's anything like his mother, he's already telling me what to do." And then, as if the world had grown impatient with their peace, It began. The first mortar struck somewhere behind the ridge, a distant thump, followed by a shudder that traveled through the earth like a tremor from the gut of the mountain itself. Bruce didn't flinch. Not anymore. He knew that first one was a warning, a test. The second would be closer. "Here we go," Red muttered, tucking the photograph into his chest pocket. The second mortar landed hard, just 20 yards to the left, dirt and snow blasting into the air, turning the night into a blur of dust and screaming metal. Bruce ducked, rolled, pulled his helmet tighter. Shouts rang out, orders and prayers, indistinguishable from one another. Then the third shell struck, and everything fractured. It landed closer, too close. There was no time to move. The explosion bloomed in a thunderous burst of sound and force. The ridge collapsed inward. Bruce felt the impact before he heard it, a concussion of heat and pressure that seemed to lift him off the ground and slam him back down all at once. When he opened his eyes, everything was quiet, not peaceful, just gone. No gunfire, no voices, only the hiss of something burning somewhere to the east. His ears rang, his chest heaved. Then he saw the blood. Red was lying 5 feet away, sprawled awkwardly on his side, a crimson pool spreading beneath him. His eyes were open, blinking slowly, dazed. Bruce dragged himself forward, every movement filled with shards of pain. His left arm hung useless, shrapnel. He could feel it pulsing near the bone, but he didn't stop. He crawled to Red's side, turned him gently, saw the torn fabric, the wound beneath. "It's bad," Red muttered, voice thick with pain. "Feels real bad, Bruce." Bruce said nothing, just nodded once. Then, with strength he didn't know he still had, he lifted Red onto his back. The snow crunched beneath them, soaked now with blood and dirt. Each step was a war, each breath a promise. Mortars continued to fall, closer now. Fire cracked in the trees. A scream echoed somewhere behind them. Not Red's, not Bruce's, but someone else's. Another boy from another foxhole, now lost. But Bruce kept going. He carried Red down the hill, through mud and wire and frozen limbs, until the tree line swallowed them, and the distant shouts of medics began to pierce the silence. Red was unconscious by then. His head lolled against Bruce's shoulder, the photograph still tucked inside his jacket, pressed against his heart. When they reached the edge of the field hospital, Bruce collapsed. He didn't remember much after that, only light. And the picture they returned to him a week later, Red's son still smiling, untouched, unstained. Red had survived. He'd gone home, raised that boy. Bruce had gone home too, eventually. But the snow of that hill had never quite melted from his memory. The room was still as stone. Emily Reed had turned pale. Her shoulders, moments ago sharp with pride, now drew inward as if some invisible weight had fallen across them. The sound of her own name, spoken not by a stranger but by her father, had landed like a slap. Bruce Delaney stood at the front of the chamber, fingers still brushing the wet edge of his medal. He hadn't looked up yet, not fully, but he had heard the voice too. Robert Reed stepped through the doorway like a man walking into a place he hadn't expected to see again. His coat hung open over a pressed grey shirt. His boots echoed faintly on the linoleum, the rhythm slow and deliberate. Every eye in the room turned to him, some curious, others cautious. A few, including a city clerk near the rear window, recognized him immediately. He had been a colonel once, a leader, a man who had given speeches at the Veterans Day Parade, who'd cut the ribbon at the reopening of the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, who had faded from public view after his retirement, but never from the quiet esteem of the town's older generation. Now he was simply a father, but one who carried authority in every step. He moved toward Emily first. She was still frozen, her arms now hanging at her sides, fists half closed, as though unsure whether to defend herself or hide her hands. Her lips moved slightly, forming a word that never found breath. He didn't speak to her just yet. Instead, he turned to Bruce. The two men looked at each other, not with confusion or surprise, but with a kind of recognition that surpassed words. Bruce straightened slightly, not out of defensiveness, but respect. There was something in Robert's eyes, not pity, not guilt, but a depth of remembrance that rarely had witnesses. Robert stepped forward until he stood just in front of Bruce. He drew in a breath. Then, his voice steady but quiet, he said, "That man you just spat on, he saved my father." Gasps rose behind them. Someone muttered something that was swallowed by the silence. Emily blinked once, then again. Robert turned toward the crowd, his voice rising now. Not loud, but sure. "Thomas Reed. Most of you never knew his name. Some called him Red. He served in Korea. He was my father. He never spoke much about the war, not until the end. But there was one story, one name. He told me to remember." He paused, scanning the room. It was Bruce Delaney. He looked back at Bruce, emotion beginning to climb his throat. "My father never forgot that night. Said it was snowing hard. Said the sky was filled with fire. Said he was bleeding out into the earth and that a hand found him in the dark. That hand dragged him across frozen ground while shells fell around them. That hand, his hand, gave me the chance to be born." He turned to Emily again. "You never knew your grandfather," he said softly. "He died before you came into the world. But you are only here because of him, and because of Bruce." The words hit like thunder wrapped in calm. Emily swayed slightly where she stood. Her mouth opened. Her voice was gone. Robert stepped back now, looked at the assembly seated around them. The council, the townsfolk, the volunteers in the back row. His hands were at his sides, not clenched, just steady. "This town has its faults," he said. "We all do. But if we start forgetting the names of the men who bled into the ground so we could argue in this very room, we've lost something bigger than zoning permits." He turned back to Bruce. With no flourish, no demand for applause, he raised his hand in a full, respectful salute. It was not ceremonial. It was not performance. It was gratitude carved into motion. Bruce held his gaze for a long moment. Then he returned the salute. Slower, perhaps, but just as steady. A soft noise rippled through the chamber. Chairs shifting, people rising. One by one, quietly, townspeople began to stand. An older woman in the front row wiped at her eyes with a bald tissue. A teenager in a hoodie hesitated, then rose too, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. The receptionist, still standing near the back, stooped to the floor. She picked up the torn pieces of Bruce's note, piecing them together gently like something sacred. She pressed them between her hands and held them to her chest. A city official stood beside his chair, uncertain, then cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Delaney, I think we'd like to hear what you came here to say." But Bruce didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply stepped aside, letting the silence answer for him. Emily stood alone now, her head lowered. Her eyes flicked toward Bruce, then toward her father. She looked like someone who had been dropped into a story she'd never bothered to read. And now the words were larger than her voice. She said nothing, but for the first time, she didn't look certain. She looked small, and somewhere in that shrinking there was the beginning of something softer. Outside, unnoticed by most, the street had grown still. The wind had calmed. The flag on the pole just outside the window hung motionless for a moment, as if it too had paused to listen. The city council chamber held its breath. It was a different kind of quiet now. No longer the sharp silence of tension or disbelief, but the deep, swelling stillness of something sacred breaking through. A tide turning, not with noise, but with presence. Bruce Delaney remained where he stood. His posture was unchanged, but something in the room had shifted around him, like gravity pulling toward a center the town had forgotten. His medals still bore the stain of spit, but no one saw disgrace anymore. They saw endurance. They saw memory that refused to bend. Robert Reed lowered his salute slowly. The gesture finished, but its meaning echoing in every breath drawn afterward. His eyes did not leave Bruce's. There was something heavy there. Not shame, not quite, but recognition, long overdue. It was the weight of generations finally carried together, not apart. A woman in the second row rose first. She had white hair coiled into a loose bun and wore a brooch in the shape of an eagle. Her lips trembled. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered something only the dead might hear. Behind her, a father lifted his young son gently to stand. The boy looked confused at first, but then nodded, mimicking his father's posture, hand to chest, face solemn. More stood. An older man, once a truck driver, now bent with time, leaned on his cane and rose slowly. A clerk from the permit desk stood next, then a man in a maintenance vest, and the librarian from the next building over. None spoke. None clapped. They simply stood, a silent wall of witness, each body rising like a candle lit. At the front of the room, Emily hadn't moved. Her arms, once defiant across her chest, now hung at her sides. She looked up at Bruce again, but not with anger, not with certainty. Her eyes were wide and searching, like someone reaching for a railing in the dark. Bruce glanced toward her, not harshly, just long enough to meet her gaze. Then he turned to the council table. The chairman, a man who had been fiddling nervously with his pen for half the meeting, now cleared his throat. "Mr. Delaney," he said, his voice shaky but clear, "you have the floor. Please, speak if you still wish to." But Bruce did not reach for the microphone. He didn't unfold a second copy of the note. He simply stepped forward a few inches, adjusted the brim of his cap with a care that spoke louder than any statement. "I didn't come here for a fight," he said. "I came to remember my friends." He looked down, then out at the crowd. "This town remembers a lot, but not everything. Some names have no plaques, some lives no stories. We gave that square not for glory, not for parades, but so they wouldn't be forgotten. That's all." There were no more words. He stepped back, letting silence return. And in that silence, something bloomed. From the hallway outside, a faint sound began to rise. A single note, held long and soft, drawn from the open bell of a trumpet. Then a second voice joined it. A student with a violin, coaxing the first notes of a solemn hymn. They were teenagers, members of the local high school's music ensemble, drawn not by invitation, but by a message sent quietly from someone at the back of the room. They had arrived in uniforms stitched with music clefs, not medals, but they stood straight as they played. It was taps, not a performance, but a tribute. Bruce closed his eyes for a moment, not to hide, but to listen. He let the music wash over him, and in it he saw the ridge again, saw the blood on snow, the trembling hand, the boy in the photograph who had grown up and become a man, a father, and now stood in this room. The notes hung in the air like fog rising from a field at dawn. When they faded, no one clapped, no one spoke, but every face in that room had changed. The torn pieces of Bruce's note still rested in the receptionist's hands. She stepped forward now, quiet and unsure, and offered them to him. "I kept them," she said. "If you want them." Bruce looked at the pages, edges frayed, ink smudged. He took them gently. "Thank you," he said. Then he folded them once more, not perfectly but with care, and placed them inside his coat. A councilwoman, wiping her cheeks with a sleeve, leaned toward the microphone. "I think it's time we protect the square, not debate it." The chairman nodded. "Agreed." The vote was swift. Unanimous. A low murmur of assent passed through the room like wind in leaves. People began to sit again, slowly, reverently, the same way one does at a graveside after a eulogy has ended. Nothing was rushed, nothing was dismissed, and though the motion was passed, though the moment was officially closed, no one left their seat. They stayed for Bruce. Emily took one step toward her father, then stopped. She reached into her bag and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. She looked at it, then at him. "I found this in the old trunk," she whispered. It was a photo, a black and white image of a soldier in a foxhole, holding a baby's picture to his chest. Bruce saw it from where he stood. His hand, unthinking, drifted toward his chest, where a matching image had once lived for years. Emily didn't apologize, not with words, but something in her posture softened, a shoulder lowered, a brow relaxed, a line of resistance fading like a tide rolling back. And for now, that was enough. The meeting dispersed slowly, like fog unraveling at the edge of dawn. There were no shouts, no rushing out into the night. People lingered. Some walked toward Bruce to shake his hand, others simply nodded, their expressions solemn, their silence more meaningful than words could ever be. Bruce took each interaction with grace. A quiet nod here, a clasp of hands there, not seeking gratitude, only answering it. Outside, the air had cooled, but not unkindly. The moon had risen, casting a soft silver light over the city hall steps. A few remaining townsfolk stood in clusters, speaking low, their voices tinged with something reflective, not just about what had happened, but about what they had almost let pass unnoticed. Inside the building, the council members stayed behind. The motion to protect the memorial site had passed unanimously, but that wasn't the end. A proposal was drafted, not just to preserve the square, but to formally designate it as a site of historical memory. A new sign would be installed. An oral history project would begin, capturing stories from local veterans, so that their voices would remain long after time tried to carry them away. Bruce's name, once unspoken in these halls, was now inked onto the minutes of the meeting, a permanent part of the public record. But not every change was structural. In the quiet of the council chambers, Emily remained. She hadn't spoken again after the photo. She had watched her father leave, his coat brushing against the backs of empty chairs as he walked out into the cool night. She hadn't followed. Not yet. Now, alone with herself, she sat on the edge of a long bench beneath a wall of faded town portraits. She stared at her hands, twisting the strap of her satchel slowly, over and over. The weight of her actions had settled in, not as shame alone, but as recognition, the painful kind that grows when certainty gives way to truth. The leadership of the New Horizons Collective, the youth activism group where Emily had risen quickly, had already issued a statement. It had gone live within the hour, as phones buzzed and social feeds filled with edited clips of what had unfolded. "Our mission is rooted in justice and dialogue," the statement read. "We do not condone personal disrespect, especially toward those who have served. We believe in growth, reflection, and accountability. Effective immediately, Ms. Reed will be placed on leave." There were no calls for cancellation, no outrage mobs, just a door, opened, but waiting. Later that night, she would find herself at home, seated on the floor beside a weathered trunk she hadn't touched in years. It had belonged to her grandfather, the man she never met, the man whose photo she had never thought to frame. Inside were letters, medals, a ration card, and a pocket Bible, with a pressed flower between its pages. For the first time, she wept not from confusion or frustration, but from understanding. Elsewhere in town, the stories continued to ripple. The high school music teacher received dozens of emails thanking her for allowing the students to come. One veteran wrote that the playing of taps had been the most meaningful moment he'd witnessed in years. At the library, a shelf was cleared for a new display. Local heroes, both known and quiet. A sign was posted. "If you have a story, we will help you tell it." And at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, spelled out in full, no longer ignored, the regulars lifted their coffee mugs that Saturday morning in a toast to Bruce Delaney. He wasn't there. He didn't need to be. His presence was already in the way the room had grown quieter, more attentive. Even the younger ones, the new recruits, the ones who had only recently returned from service, seemed to carry themselves a little taller. At City Hall, a training session was scheduled for staff and council members. Not mandatory, but strongly encouraged. The topic, honor in public service, recognizing those who serve, making room for stories often lost in the noise of progress. And finally, tucked in the back of the weekly town paper, below the council notices and softball team results, a column ran with the headline, "He carried us. A community remembers Bruce Delaney." It was short, just a few paragraphs, but it was enough. The morning after the council meeting came without hurry. Sunlight filtered gently through the same kitchen window where steam curled from Bruce Delaney's coffee cup. The radio was off. The kettle had cooled. Outside, the sparrows gathered on the porch railing like they always did, waiting for him. He stepped outside slowly, his hand brushing the doorway as if to anchor himself in the familiar. The cool air touched his skin with a kind of respect, as if even the wind remembered something important. In his hands, he held 2 picture frames. One was well worn, the photo of Helen in her Sunday dress, smiling with the kind of warmth that made silence feel full. The second frame was new. The photograph inside it was decades old, but freshly mounted. Thomas Red Reed, young and grinning, his eyes squinting against the Korean snow, a smudge of ash across one cheek, the laughter of war-forged friendship still dancing in his posture. Bruce placed the new frame beside the old, setting them both on the mantel above the small fireplace he rarely used. He didn't speak. He just looked at them, nodding once as if to say, "You're still here. You always were." Later that day, he made the walk to Veterans Square. He didn't drive, though someone had offered. He preferred the rhythm of his own feet, the slow conversation between soul and sidewalk that reminded him he was still steady, still grounded. When he arrived, the square was empty. Morning light stretched across the stone monument at the center. The names carved into it caught the sun like scripture. A new sign had been staked near the walkway, its lettering simple and proud. Veterans Memorial Square, preserved by the town, protected by memory. At the steps leading up to the monument, something colorful caught his eye. Chalk drawings, dozens of them, scrawled by small hands, some messy, some precise. Among them were messages. "Thank you, Mr. Bruce. You matter. We remember." He stood there for a long time. Then he stepped forward and rested one palm against the warm stone of the memorial. His hand didn't tremble. It simply rested, firm and familiar. He whispered nothing, but his eyes were full. A breeze picked up, lifting the corners of the chalk drawings. The flag overhead flapped once, catching a ray of sun. The air smelled faintly of grass and morning heat. Bruce adjusted his cap, squared his shoulders, and stepped back. Then, with no audience, no camera, no applause, he brought his hand to his brow and offered a slow, precise salute. The kind you give not to a flag, but to memory itself. A few passers-by noticed from across the street, a woman with a stroller, a man carrying a newspaper. They paused. They didn't interrupt. They didn't speak, but they would remember. Later that evening, in a quiet corner of town, Emily sat on her apartment floor beside the old trunk again. She held the same photo in her lap, her grandfather cradling her father's baby picture in a frozen trench. A note lay beside her, handwritten, unsent. She wasn't ready to speak to Bruce yet, but she would be, soon. And so the town moved on, but not unchanged, not unmoved, because something had shifted, something had been remembered, and someone who had been walked past for too long now stood taller, not because he demanded it, but because he had always deserved it. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.